I watched through the rain-streaked window as my stepmother's black Mercedes pulled away from the curb, my 9-year-old sister Emma's face pressed against the glass, smirking. Thunder cracked overhead, and I stood there in my soaked uniform, cleats in hand, realizing they weren't coming back. Not tonight. Maybe not ever. The parking lot had emptied an hour ago, and Coach Martinez had waited with me until his own family called, apologetic but firm. He had to go. Now it was just me, the rain, and the certain knowledge that this abandonment was a test. In my first life, I'd waited here for 4 hours before walking home in the dark, catching pneumonia that nearly killed me. But I'd been reborn at age 7 with 12 years of memories intact, and this time, I knew exactly what this moment meant. War. The water pooled around my feet as I pulled out the phone I'd secretly bought with money from tutoring jobs. Money I'd hidden from my family in this second life. My fingers were numb, but I dialed the number I'd memorized from my previous existence, one I'd never had the courage to call before I died at 19 in a tragic accident that I now knew was nothing of the sort. Hello? The voice was gruff, suspicious. Grandfather Chen? My voice cracked from cold and from the weight of what I was about to do. It's Lily, your granddaughter. I need help. The line went silent for so long I thought he'd hung up. Then, where are you? 30 minutes later, a sleek town car pulled up, and a driver with kind eyes ushered me into warmth. He wrapped me in a blanket that smelled of expensive wool and handed me hot tea from a thermos. Mr. Chen is waiting at the estate, he said gently. He's very eager to meet you. I sipped the tea and watched the familiar streets pass by, remembering. In my first life, I'd never made this call. I'd walked home that night, gotten sick, and while I was weak and feverish, my stepmother Patricia had convinced my father to sign papers removing me from his will. It was a small thing then. He was only moderately successful, and I was too young to understand what it meant. But by the time I was 16, Dad's tech company had exploded, making him worth hundreds of millions. By the time I was 19, Patricia and Emma had everything, and I had nothing. Actually, less than nothing. Because when I'd finally discovered that my real mother's family, the Chens, were one of the wealthiest dynasties in the city, and I'd worked up the courage to contact my grandfather, Patricia had found out. 2 days later, I'd fallen down the stairs. In the hospital, barely conscious, I'd heard her voice. Such a tragedy. She was always so clumsy. And then, quieter, to someone else. The old man can't prove anything. By the time the lawyers are done, he'll be too tired to fight. But I didn't die right away in my first life. I lingered for 3 weeks, long enough to see my father's grief twist into something ugly under Patricia's. Manipulation, long enough to watch Emma practice her sad face for the cameras while wearing my mother's jewelry that should have been mine. Long enough to understand that my death was convenient for them, profitable even. Then I'd closed my eyes for the last time at 19 and opened them again in my 7-year-old body, gasping awake from a nightmare that had been real. The Chen estate rose before me now like a fortress of stone and glass, perched on the hillside overlooking the city. Security gates rolled open, revealing manicured gardens, even in the rain, and a mansion that dwarfed my father's house. The house where I was barely tolerated, where I slept in the smallest bedroom and ate dinner after everyone else, where I was the help more than the daughter. An elderly man stood at the entrance, straight back despite his years, his face carved with lines of authority and something else. Grief. My mother's father. In my previous life, I'd seen him once at what I later realized was my funeral, standing apart from the others, his face, a mask of rage and sorrow. Lily. He didn't move to embrace me, but his eyes, my mother's eyes, filled with tears. You have her face. My Mei Ling's face. I got out of the car, still wrapped in the blanket, and stood before him. I'm sorry I didn't call sooner. You're 11 years old, he said, his voice rough. You shouldn't have to call at all. Your father... He stopped, composing himself. Come inside. We have much to discuss. Over soup and warm bread in a dining room larger than my entire floor at Dad's house, I told him the partial truth. That Patricia and Emma had left me at practice deliberately, that this wasn't the first time, that I was treated like a servant in my own home. I didn't tell him about the rebirth, about the memories of my death, about knowing the future. Some secrets were too dangerous even for allies. Grandfather Chen listened, his face growing harder with each detail. When I finished, he set down his spoon with careful precision. "Your mother made me promise something before she died," he said. "She made me swear I wouldn't interfere with your father's custody, that I'd let him raise you as he saw fit. She believed in love, my Mei Ling. She thought he loved you both enough to weather anything." "He remarried 6 months after she died," I said quietly. "He had Emma a year later." "I know." His jaw clenched. "I've been watching from a distance, honoring my daughter's wishes. But what you've described, Mei Ling would never have wanted this. She'd have torn up that promise herself." He leaned forward. "I'm going to make you an offer, Lily. You're old enough to understand it, I think. I'm offering you a choice." I waited, my heart pounding. This was different from my first life, where I'd approached him as a desperate teenager. I was changing things, rewriting the script. "Option 1, I go to your father now tonight and I take you away. I have lawyers who would bury him in paperwork. I have investigators who could prove neglect. You'd live here with me and want for nothing." He paused. "But your father would fight, if only because Patricia would make him. It would be ugly, public, and it would take years. You'd be free, but you'd lose any chance of a relationship with him." "And option 2?" I asked, though I was already planning, already seeing the chessboard in my mind. "Option 2 is more subtle. You continue living with your father, but I provide resources, money, education, opportunities, all of it secret. I teach you about the family business. I train you to be a Chen. And when you're 18, you make your own choice about where you belong." His eyes gleamed. "But in the meantime, you'll have power they don't know about, tools they can't take away. Your stepmother wants to control you through dependency. I'm offering you the means to be free, even while you're trapped." I thought of my first life, of being powerless, of watching Patricia and Emma take everything. I thought of the years of abuse that had led to my death, and I thought of the revenge I'd been planning since the moment I woke up in my 7-year-old body, the long game I needed to play. "Option 2, I said. "But I need something else. I need you to help me learn everything. Business, law, investing. Everything you'd teach a grandson you were grooming to take over. I need to be stronger than they are. Smart enough that they never see me coming." Grandfather Chen smiled, and it was sharp as a blade. "You really are Mei Ling's daughter." She was soft on the outside, steel underneath. He extended his hand. "We have a deal, but Lily, call me when you need help, always. I couldn't save my daughter, but I'll be damned if I lose her child to those vultures." I shook his hand and felt the first pieces of my revenge sliding into place. When the driver took me home at midnight, to a house where no one had even noticed I was gone, I found Patricia in the living room, a glass of wine in her hand, watching some reality show about rich housewives. She glanced up as I walked in, dripping water on her precious hardwood floors. "Oh, you made it back," she said, her tone suggesting mild surprise, as if I'd been on a quick errand, rather than abandoned in a storm. "Your father's asleep. Try not to wake him." Her eyes traveled over my soaked form. "And clean up that mess. The floors just had work done." In my first life, I'd burst into tears at this moment, overwhelmed by the cruelty of it. I'd run to my room and cried myself to sleep, and in the morning, Dad had believed Patricia's story that I'd walked home by choice, being dramatic and difficult. This time, I just looked at her. Really looked at her, seeing not the glamorous stepmother who'd terrified my childhood, but a woman in her 30s who'd married for money and security, who saw a stepdaughter as competition for resources. She was smart, I'd give her that. Manipulative and patient. But she wasn't as smart as she thought she was. "Of course, Patricia," I said softly. "I'll clean it up right away." Surprise flickered across her face. She'd expected tears or defiance, but I just went to the kitchen, got the mop, and cleaned the floors thoroughly. When I finished, I went to my small bedroom, changed into dry clothes, and sat down at the desk where I kept my books. On the surface, I looked like a normal 11-year-old's room. Some stuffed animals, school papers, a few participation trophies from sports I'd been forced to join. But inside the locked drawer of my desk, the lock I'd installed myself with tools I'd bought with my secret money, I kept the real tools of my war. There was a ledger, written in code I'd developed, tracking every incident of abuse, every lie Patricia told Dad every time Emma was given something that should have been mine. There were printouts from public records searches about Patricia's past, the previous marriages she'd never mentioned, the lawsuits from her 20s. There were financial documents I'd carefully photographed when I'd had access to Dad's office, showing the slow siphoning of assets into accounts only Patricia controlled. And now I added a new entry, abandoned at soccer practice, called Grandfather Chen, Phase 1 complete. Because this was Phase 1 of a much larger plan. Patricia and Emma thought they were winning, that they'd successfully isolated me and convinced Dad I was difficult and ungrateful. They thought they had years to consolidate their power before I became a threat. They had no idea I'd already lived through their endgame. I knew how this story ended if I did nothing, with me dead and them inheriting everything. I knew Patricia's long game. Wait until I was 18, convince Dad I was estranged by choice, and ensure his will left everything to Emma. In my first life, I'd barely gotten a college fund, and even that had been tied up in trusts Patricia controlled. But in my first life, I hadn't had 4 years of advanced warning. I hadn't had the Chen family resources. I hadn't had the cold, clear rage of someone who'd been murdered and been given a second chance. Over the next 2 years, my life split into 2 parallel tracks. At home, I was the perfect victim, quiet, obedient, trying so hard for scraps of affection. I did my chores without complaint. I accepted Emma's hand-me-downs, even though Dad's company was now worth tens of millions. I smiled when they forgot my birthday, said nothing when I was left out of family vacations. I played the role Patricia expected, the unwanted stepdaughter who knew her place. But 3 evenings a week, and every weekend, I disappeared to Grandfather Chen's estate. Dad barely noticed. Patricia told him I'd joined after-school programs, and he was too busy with his company's explosive growth to check. Emma was too self-absorbed to care where I went, and Patricia was just relieved I was out of the house. At the Chen estate, I transformed. Grandfather assigned me tutors, not just for school subjects, but for business strategy, negotiation, finance, and law. He brought me to his office and taught me to read balance sheets and spot lies in contracts. He introduced me to his associates, powerful men and women who saw in me not a child, but an heir being groomed for power. Your father built a tech company, Grandfather told me one Saturday in his study overlooking the city. It's impressive, I'll give him that. But he's soft where it matters. He built something valuable and then handed the keys to a woman who saw it as a piggy bank. I'm teaching you different lessons. I'm teaching you to build empires and protect them. I soaked it all in. I learned that Grandfather Chen's wealth wasn't flashy like Dad's new money. It was old, deep, and diversified across real estate, manufacturing, and private equity. The Chen Group was a shadow player in the city's economy, the kind of power that didn't need to show off because it owned the stage. And slowly, carefully, I began to build my own foundation. With Grandfather's help, I created a trust in my name, funded by him, but managed by me under the guise of a youth financial literacy project. I learned to invest, and I was good at it. The memories of my first life gave me knowledge of which companies would boom and which would bust over the next 8 years. By the time I was 13, my trust was worth over $2 million. By 15, it was approaching $8 million. None of it was traceable to me in any obvious way. I was just a teenage girl with no apparent income. Meanwhile, I watched and documented everything at home. Patricia's mask was slipping as Dad's wealth grew. She'd been careful at first, but success made her bold. I started finding evidence of larger thefts, company funds redirected to shell accounts, business deals structured to benefit Patricia's friends, contracts awarded to companies that kicked back percentages. Emma, too, was showing her true colors. She'd been a spoiled child. Now she was becoming a cruel teenager. At 15, she bragged to her friends about how much her mom had wrapped Dad around her finger. She mocked me openly at school, turning my classmates against me with rumors and lies. She'd stolen my homework, my projects, even the essay that won me a scholarship competition, claimed it as her own when she found my draft and turned in a copied version before I could submit mine. That one had stung, even forewarned. But I'd learned from my first life. Getting angry in the moment only hurt me. So I documented it, saved all my drafts with timestamps, and filed it away. Revenge was a dish best served cold, and I was building a freezer. The summer I turned 16, everything shifted. Dad's company, Tech Dynamics, went public. Overnight, his net worth exploded from comfortable millions to grotesque hundreds of millions. He was on magazine covers, giving TED Talks, being courted by politicians and celebrities. Patricia was in heaven. She'd married a modestly successful entrepreneur, and now she was wife to a titan. She renovated the house into a modern mansion, spent millions on art and cars, enrolled Emma in the most expensive private school in the state. And me? I got a new phone, a year-old model, handed down from Emma. "You should be grateful," Patricia told me in front of Dad. "It's important you learn the value of money, not like these spoiled rich kids who get everything new." Dad had nodded along, already halfway out the door to another meeting. He barely saw me anymore. The company consumed him, and what little attention he had left went to Patricia and Emma. But I didn't need his attention anymore. Because at 16, I was no longer a helpless child. I was a young woman who could pass for 18, who'd been trained by one of the shrewdest businessmen in the city, who had millions in assets and a network of connections Patricia couldn't imagine. And I'd just figured out how Patricia had really sealed her victory in my first life. It happened by accident, or maybe it was the universe's way of balancing the scales. I was home alone, rare enough these days, when I heard Patricia's phone ring in her bedroom. She'd left it behind, rushing out to meet Emma at some expensive boutique. The ringtone was distinctive, the one she'd set for her lawyer. I'd been trained by Grandfather Chen. I'd learned that information was power. So I went to her room, the master suite she'd redecorated 3 times, spending hundreds of thousands. And I looked at her phone. It was unlocked. She was so confident in her dominance that she'd never even set a passcode for use at home. The text preview on the screen read, "Draft will revisions complete per your specifications. Waiting for your sign-off before we—" My heart stopped. I opened the full message thread, and there it was, the entire plot laid out in black and white. Patricia had been working with her lawyer for over a year to draft a new will for Dad, one that left almost everything to Emma, with only a token trust for me that Patricia would control until I was 30. The messages discussed tactics, how to make Dad sign it without reading too carefully, when to bring it up during the stress of the IPO, how to frame it as protecting the family fortune from my instability. There were even messages about accelerating the timeline. "The girl's getting older," Patricia had written, "more independent. Need to lock this down before she gets ideas about college money or contacting her mother's family. Once this will is signed, she's contained." I photographed everything. Every message, every draft document, every note about Dad's schedule and mood. My hands were shaking with rage, but my mind was crystal clear. This was it, the smoking gun that proved Patricia's intentions. But I didn't confront her. I didn't run to Dad with evidence, because I remembered my first life, where I'd tried to expose Patricia's smaller schemes and been dismissed as a jealous teenager. Dad loved Patricia, or thought he did. He was addicted to the peace she brought, the way she managed his life and made everything smooth. Confronting her directly would just make me the problem. No, I needed something bigger. I needed to destroy her completely, that she could never recover, never spin it, never turn Dad against me again. So I went to Grandfather Chen with everything I'd found, and together we began to plan. "She's going to push your father to sign this will in the next 3 months, Grandfather said, studying the documents I'd printed. We were in his private study, rain pattering against the windows. It always seemed to be raining during the turning points of my life. Probably during the holidays, when he's distracted and grateful and feeling generous. She'll make it seem like a gift to Emma, protection for her future." "Can we stop it?" I asked. "We could try, but lawyers and wills can be messy." "She'd just draft another one. Be more careful next time." He looked at me with those sharp eyes. "What do you want, Lily? Really want?" I took a breath. "I want everything she tried to take from me." I want Dad to see who she really is. I want Emma to understand that stealing from me has consequences, and I want them to know it was me, that the stepdaughter they dismissed and abused had more power than they ever imagined. Grandfather Chen smiled. Then we'll need to be more ambitious than just preventing a will change. We'll need to dismantle her piece by piece. He pulled out a legal pad and began writing. Patricia's real vulnerability isn't your father, it's her greed. Let's talk about how much she's actually stolen from Tech Dynamics. Over the next 6 weeks, we built the case. Grandfather hired forensic accountants, discreet ones, unconnected to the Chen Group, to analyze Tech Dynamics' finances. What they found was staggering. Over the past 4 years, Patricia had siphoned over $12 million through various schemes: fake consulting contracts, inflated expense reimbursements, business deals with companies that existed only on paper. She'd been careful, spreading it across many small transactions, but it was all there once you knew to look. The beauty of it, one of the accountants told me, is that she got arrogant. The amounts got larger as the company grew. She thought she was being proportional, but she was just making it more obvious. We documented everything: bank records, shell companies, forged signatures. We found the web of lies that let Patricia pretend she had bad business expertise, when really she was just a con artist who'd married up and gotten greedy. But we needed more. We needed the will plot, the abuse, the full picture of who Patricia really was. And we needed the reveal to be devastating and public. Your father's company is planning a big holiday gala, Grandfather noted, end of December, celebrating the first year post-IPO. Every investor, every board member, every major client invited. Patricia's been planning it for months. She wants to cement her place as the queen of society. I smiled, understanding. The perfect stage. The perfect stage, he agreed. But we'll need your father on our side before then, or this all falls apart. He needs to see the truth about Patricia, but in a way he can't deny or rationalize away. That was the trickiest part. Dad wasn't stupid, but he was willfully blind. He'd invested so much in his marriage to Patricia, rebuilt his life around her after Mom died. Admitting he'd been conned, that he'd let his daughter be abused while he was manipulated, would shatter him. We need to let Patricia make the first move with the will, I said slowly, working through it. Let her think she's winning. Get Dad to the point where he's about to sign. Then I come forward with everything, not as an attack, but as someone trying to protect him from being defrauded. Frame it as concern for the company, not jealousy. He'll want to verify independently, Grandfather warned. Good, the evidence will hold up, and while his lawyers are investigating Patricia's theft, we leak the rest. The abuse, the will manipulation, everything. Make it so he can't ignore it even if he wants to. It was ruthless and calculated, exactly the kind of strategy Grandfather Chen had taught me. But I was my mother's daughter, and she'd been steel underneath the softness. I could do this. Thanksgiving came, and with it, Patricia's first move. The holiday was grotesque. Catered food for 30, even though it was just the 4 of us, everything designed to show off Dad's wealth. Patricia wore a dress that cost more than most people's cars. Emma had a new diamond necklace just because. I wore a simple outfit I'd bought from a department store sale rack, intentionally modest, playing the part they expected. After dinner, while Dad was in his study and Emma was video chatting with friends, I heard Patricia's voice carrying down the hall. She was in the study with Dad, and her tone was honey sweet. Just think it's time to formalize things, darling. The company's so successful now, and we should make sure everything's protected. You know, in case something happens, God forbid. But we have to be practical. I crept closer, staying out of sight. I already have a will, Dad said, sounding tired. I know, but that was before the IPO, before things got so complicated. My lawyer drew up something more comprehensive. It protects Emma's future, makes sure she's taken care of no matter what. And there are provisions for Lily too, of course. A trust that will give her stability without the pressure of managing too much too young. You know how she is, sweetheart. She's not like Emma. She'd probably just give it all away or make poor choices. There it was, the poison dripped so, sweetly, painting me as incompetent, unworthy, while setting up Emma as the deserving heir. I don't know, Patricia, Dad said slowly. I should probably have my own lawyers look at this. Of course, absolutely. I just wanted to show you first, so you understand the thinking behind it. We can review it with anyone you want. I just worry, you know? You work so hard, and I want to make sure your wishes are clear, that both your daughters are taken care of appropriately. Not equally, appropriately, as if I deserved less. I'd heard enough. I went back to my room and sent a single text to Grandfather Chen. She's making her move. Christmas signing likely. His response came immediately. Be ready. We move on the 20th. The next 3 weeks were torture. I had to watch Patricia and Emma celebrate early, taking weekend trips to luxury resorts, getting spa treatments, planning their outfits for the holiday gala. Patricia would smile at me sometimes, these knowing little smirks, as if she could barely contain her glee about the future she was securing. Emma was worse. At 17, she'd fully embraced being Daddy's princess. She treated me like staff, demanding I help her with homework, which I did, carefully inserting small errors she never caught, asking me to run errands for her, complaining to Patricia when I didn't move fast enough. I don't understand why we still have to deal with her, Emma said one night at dinner, speaking about me like I wasn't there. She's 16 now. Can't she just go to boarding school or something? Emma, that's unkind, Dad said, but his voice was automatic, distracted. He was looking at his phone, probably at work emails. I'm just saying, once the new will is in place and everything's finalized, maybe Lily would be happier somewhere else. She's always so sulky here. Patricia shot Emma a warning look. They were being too obvious, but the damage was done. Dad looked up, confused. New will? What are you talking about? Oh, didn't Mom tell you? The papers the lawyer drew up, to protect the family. Emma smiled, innocent and cruel. To make sure everything goes to the people who actually appreciate what you've built. Dad's face went carefully neutral. Patricia, can we talk about this later? Of course, darling. Emma, not at the dinner table. But I saw the flicker of something in Dad's eyes. Doubt, maybe, or the first hint of suspicion. Emma's carelessness had planted a seed. I caught Grandfather Chen on video call that night and told him what happened. He nodded thoughtfully. Good. Let him start questioning. The more he doubts Patricia's motives before we reveal everything, the more receptive he'll be. Do you think he'll choose us? I asked quietly. When it comes down to it? Grandfather was silent for a moment. I think your father loved your mother very much. And I think he's been running from that grief ever since she died. Patricia offered him an escape. A new family, a chance to pretend the past didn't hurt, but he loved Mei Ling. And I have to believe that deep down he loves you too. He's just forgotten how to show it. He leaned closer to the camera. But, Lily, if he doesn't choose you, you'll still be fine. You're a Chen. You'll always have a place with me. And you'll inherit everything I've built. You don't need his validation to be powerful. I nodded, but we both knew the truth. I didn't just want power or money. I wanted my father back. I wanted him to see me, really see me, and choose me over the woman who'd poisoned his life. On December 20th, Grandfather Chen came to our house for the first time since my mother's funeral. He'd called ahead, formal and cold, and requested a family meeting. Dad had tried to refuse, but Grandfather had mentioned lawyers and tech dynamics, and suddenly Dad was very interested in meeting. Patricia was furious. I could see it in the tension around her eyes, even as she smiled and played hostess. She knew Grandfather Chen was a threat, had probably been waiting for years for him to make a move. Emma was just confused and annoyed that her plans with friends were interrupted. We gathered in Dad's study, the room where so many of the decisions that shaped my life had been made. Grandfather Chen sat in one of the leather chairs, straight-backed and imposing, looking every inch the dynasty patriarch. His lawyer, Mr. Harrison, stood beside him with a briefcase. I sat next to Grandfather, and for the first time in years, I sat with confidence instead of trying to make myself small. Dad noticed. I saw his eyes flicker between me and Grandfather, seeing the resemblance, the way I held myself like a Chen instead of a victim, Thank you for seeing me, David, grandfather began formal. I know we haven't spoken since Mei Ling's funeral. That was my choice, and I take responsibility for it. But circumstances have changed. What circumstances? Dad asked carefully. Patricia's hand was on his arm, her grip tight. I'm going to be direct because that's the Chen way. Over the past several years, while you've been building your company, someone has been stealing from you, systematically, extensively, to the tune of over $12 million. The room went dead silent. Patricia's face drained of color. Emma looked confused. Dad just stared. Grandfather nodded to Mr. Harrison, who began laying out documents on the desk. These are forensic accounting reports conducted by 3 independent firms. They show a pattern of embezzlement dating back 4 years. Shell companies, fake contracts, forged signatures, inflated expenses. The money all traces back to accounts controlled by one person. That's ridiculous, Patricia said, her voice sharp. David, this is clearly a ploy to— The evidence is extensive and incontrovertible, Mr. Harrison interrupted smoothly. Bank records, email trails, signed contracts. Ms. Patricia Reed, as the shell companies are, registered under her maiden name, has been systematically defrauding Tech Dynamics since shortly after the company's initial growth phase. Dad's face had gone white. No, there must be a mistake. There's no mistake, Dad, I said quietly. It was the first time I'd spoken, and everyone turned to look at me. I found the first evidence months ago. I brought it to Grandfather Chen because I didn't know what else to do. I knew you wouldn't believe me if I came to you directly. You've been conspiring with him? Patricia hissed, dropping the sweet mask. You ungrateful little— Be very careful, Grandfather Chen said, his voice like ice. That ungrateful little girl is my granddaughter and the sole heir to my estate. She's also the person who potentially saved your husband from complete financial ruin. If this theft had continued undetected for another year, the IPO profits would have been significantly depleted. Your lifestyle, Patricia, would have evaporated. David, you can't possibly believe this, Patricia said, turning to Dad with tears in her eyes. I love you. I've supported you through everything. This is his revenge for you marrying again after Mei Ling died. He's using Lily to tear our family apart. Dad looked lost, caught between competing realities. I could see him wanting to believe Patricia, wanting the easy comfort of denial. So I played my trump card. The will, I said simply. Tell him about the will you've been planning, Patricia. The one where I get almost nothing and Emma gets everything. The one your lawyer has been drafting for months. The one you were going to have Dad sign over Christmas. Patricia's face transformed, the mask cracking completely, revealing something ugly underneath. You little spy. You went through my phone. I did, I admitted. Just like you went through my school papers and gave them to Emma to plagiarize? Just like you went through Dad's financial records to find accounts to steal from. You taught me to look for information, Patricia. I just learned the lesson better than you expected. Emma was backing toward the door, sensing the shift in the room. But Grandfather Chen had positioned his lawyer there. There would be no escape, no retreat to regroup. David, Grandfather said more gently now. I know this is painful, but you need to see all of it. Mr. Harrison, please show him the rest. The lawyer laid out more documents, the will drafts showing how Patricia had planned to essentially disinherit me. Screenshots of text messages where she discussed manipulating Dad's emotions to get him to sign. Financial records showing her expensive purchases, the jewelry, the cars, the renovations, all funded by stolen money. And then, the worst part, documented incidents of abuse and neglect spanning years. That last part, I'd compiled myself. Every cruel word, every time I'd been abandoned or belittled or made to feel worthless, I'd written it all down with dates and details. And Grandfather had worked with child welfare experts to frame it properly. It was devastating on paper, a chronicle of systematic emotional abuse. She left Lily at soccer practice in a rainstorm when she was 11, Grandfather said, his voice rough with emotion. Left her there for hours, a child in the cold. That was the night Lily called me for the first time. She was terrified. She'd been made to feel so worthless that she thought being abandoned was normal. Dad's hands were shaking as he looked through the documents. Lily, is this all true? I met his eyes. Every word. I have more documentation if you need it. Photos, voice recordings, witnesses. I've been collecting evidence for years because I knew no one would believe me without proof. You never believe me, Dad. You always take her side. That's not... Dad stopped, because it was true. We both knew it was true. Patricia made her final play, dropping to her knees beside Dad's chair in a theatrical display of grief. David, please, you know me. I love you. I love our family. Yes, I made some mistakes with money. I was just trying to secure our future, and maybe I used poor judgment. But I've never stolen, never deliberately hurt anyone. And the will? I was just trying to protect Emma, protect our daughter. Lily has her grandfather. She has the Chen fortune. Emma only has us. It was a good performance. Might have even worked in my first life, where I'd had no proof and no allies. But Dad was looking at the evidence, really looking at it, and I could see the moment it clicked. The realization that he'd been blind, that he'd let this happen, that he'd failed his first daughter while his second wife robbed him and his first wife's family watched from a distance. Get out, he said quietly. Patricia froze. What? Get out of my house. Now, both of you. Dad's voice was shaking, but it was firm. I don't know what's real anymore, but I know I need you gone while I figure this out. Mr. Harrison, can you arrange security? Already done, sir, the lawyer said, pulling out his phone. I have a team waiting outside. Ms. Reed and Ms. Emma Reed will be escorted to a hotel for the evening. If the evidence holds up to your independent investigation, we recommend filing for divorce and pressing criminal charges. You can't do this, Emma shrieked, finding her voice. Dad, she's lying. Lily's always been jealous of me, of us. She's just trying to tear our family apart because she's bitter about her mom dying. It was the wrong thing to say, the absolutely wrong thing. Because Dad's face went hard, and I realized that whatever doubts he might have had, that last bit of cruelty toward my mother's memory had sealed Patricia and Emma's fate. Out, he repeated. Now! Security came, professional, efficient men in suits who could have been Grandfather Chen's people or Dad's lawyer's people. Patricia tried to maintain dignity as she was escorted out, but Emma was hysterical. Screaming threats and accusations, I watched them go and felt nothing, no triumph, no relief. Just a cold certainty that this was justice, delayed but finally arriving. When they were gone, Dad collapsed into his chair, his head in his hands. Grandfather Chen stood, preparing to leave, but Dad's voice stopped him. Wait, please. Dad looked up, and he looked old suddenly, worn. I need to apologize to both of you. I need to... God, Mei Ling would be so ashamed of me. My daughter would be heartbroken, Grandfather Chen said bluntly. She trusted you with the most precious thing in her life, and you let a con artist abuse that gift for years. But Mei Ling would also forgive you because she had a soft heart. I'm not as forgiving. I don't expect forgiveness, Dad said. But I want to make this right. For Lily, if it's not too late. I dreamed of this moment in my first life. The moment Dad would see the truth and choose me. But now that it was here, I felt the weight of all those years of neglect. You couldn't just erase that pain with an apology. We'll see, I said quietly. First, you need to deal with Patricia properly. If she really stole that money, she needs to face consequences, and we need to figure out what's real in our family and what was manipulation. Dad nodded, looking at me with something like respect for the first time in years. When did you get so strong? I've always been strong, I replied. You just never noticed. Grandfather Chen placed a hand on my shoulder. I'll leave you two to talk, but David, know this. Lily is a Chen now in every way that matters. She has a place with me always. Whether she chooses to rebuild something with you is entirely her decision. Don't waste this chance. After he left, Dad and I sat in awkward silence for a long moment. Finally, he spoke. Tell me everything. Not the evidence, not the legal version. Tell me what it was really like living here. Please. So I did. I told him about the small cruelties and the large ones, about feeling invisible in my own home, about being treated like a burden. I told him about the soccer practice night, about being left behind at school events, about having my accomplishments stolen and my failures magnified. I told him about all of it, and I watched him break a little more with each story. When I finished, he was crying silently. I'm so sorry, Lily. I'm so sorry. I thought I was building a new family, a stable home. I thought I was honoring your mother by moving forward, but I just, I abandoned you. I let you be hurt because it was easier than seeing the truth. Yes, I agreed, because there was no point softening it. You did. Can you forgive me? He asked, his voice breaking. I thought about it carefully. Maybe, eventually, but Dad, you need to understand, I'm not the same girl who needed your approval to survive. I have Grandfather Chen now. I have my own money, my own plans. I'm going to college in 2 years, and I'm going to build my own life. Whether you're part of that life or not depends on what happens next. What do you want to happen? I want you to follow through. Really investigate Patricia, press charges if the evidence is real, get divorced. I want Emma to face consequences for plagiarizing my work. I want the world to know what they did. I leaned forward. And I want you to actually be my father again. Not just say it, but do it. Show up. Pay attention. Choose me, at least some of the time. Dad nodded slowly. I can do that. I will do that. Whatever it takes. It was a start. Not forgiveness, not yet, but a beginning. The next week was chaos. Dad's lawyers conducted their own investigation and confirmed everything Grandfather's people had found. Patricia had indeed stolen over $12 million, and the evidence was overwhelming. Criminal charges were filed, divorce papers were served, a restraining order was issued, keeping both Patricia and Emma away from the house and the company. Emma, desperate and furious, tried to salvage something. She went to the media with a sob story about being cast out by her evil stepsister and betrayed by her father. But I'd prepared for that too. I released my evidence publicly, the plagiarism, the documented abuse, the timeline of Patricia's theft. Emma's social media accounts, where she'd bragged about her mother's manipulation and mocked me, were leaked by anonymous sources. Her friends turned on her overnight, and her private school expelled her for academic dishonesty. It was brutal. It was complete. It was exactly what they deserved. Patricia's trial became a media sensation. The gold digger who'd conned a tech CEO and abused his daughter. She tried to claim it was a misunderstanding, that she'd just been managing family funds, but the evidence was too clear. She was convicted on multiple counts of embezzlement and fraud. The judge, looking at the abuse documentation, made sure to note during sentencing that her crimes were especially heinous given the vulnerable child in her care. 8 years. Patricia got 8 years in federal prison. Her appeals failed. Her lawyers abandoned her when she couldn't pay their fees with the stolen money that had been seized. Emma ended up living with Patricia's mother in a small apartment across the state. Her dreams of luxury and status shattered. She tried to reach out to Dad a few times, but he never responded. As far as he was concerned, he only had one daughter, me. The holiday gala happened on schedule, but it was transformed. Instead of Patricia's celebration of social climbing, it became Dad's public apology and my coming out party as a Chen. I wore a dress Grandfather had commissioned, elegant, powerful, in the Chen family colors. I wore my mother's jewelry, pieces that had been locked away at the Chen estate for years, waiting for me to be old enough to appreciate them. And I stood on stage next to Dad and Grandfather as Dad made his announcement. I need to say something, Dad began, his voice carrying across the ballroom full of investors, clients, and society figures. Many of you know that my first wife, Mei Ling Chen, passed away 13 years ago. What you may not know is that in my grief, I made terrible choices. I remarried poorly, and in the process, I neglected the greatest gift Mei Ling gave me, our daughter, Lily. The room was silent, hanging on every word. I could see the gossip spreading in whispers and glances. My second wife and her daughter engaged in years of abuse toward Lily and systematic theft from this company. The legal proceedings are ongoing, but I want to be clear. They no longer have any place in my life or in Tech Dynamics. What they do have is my eternal shame for not protecting my daughter sooner. He turned to me and his eyes were wet. Lily, I failed you. I let you suffer while I was blind to what was happening in my own home. You're stronger than I ever knew, smarter than I gave you credit for, and you saved this company from collapse. You're the true heir to what I've built, and I'm going to spend the rest of my life proving I deserve to be your father. Then Grandfather Chen stepped forward. For the record, Lily is also the sole heir to the Chen Group. She carries her mother's legacy and her mother's strength. Patricia Reed tried to isolate her, make her feel worthless. Instead, Lily became exactly who she was meant to be, a force to be reckoned with. The applause was thunderous, and standing there, flanked by my father and my grandfather, wearing my mother's diamonds and my own hard-won confidence, I finally felt the triumph I'd been working toward for years. This was my rebirth, made complete. The next 2 years flew by. I graduated high school with honors, real honors this time, with no one to steal my achievements. I got into Harvard on my own merits, with glowing recommendations from grandfather's business associates who'd watched me grow into my potential. Dad kept his promise. He showed up. We had dinner together twice a week, just us, rebuilding the relationship that had been damaged for so long. We talked about Mom sometimes, and he told me stories I'd never heard about how they met, how she'd been the strongest person he'd ever known, despite her gentle appearance. You're so much like her, he told me once. I couldn't see it before because I was too busy trying to forget. But you have her fire, her strategic mind. She built the foundation of Tech Dynamics, you know. Those first algorithms that made the company work? That was Mei Ling. I was just the face for investors. And I let Patricia take credit for your mother's legacy. He transferred 50% of Tech Dynamics to me in a trust that would fully vest when I turned 21. It should have been yours all along, he said. Why? Your mother built this. You saved it. It's only right. Grandfather Chen taught me everything else, how to manage the family, business, how to read people, how to build and maintain power. On my 18th birthday, he threw me a party at the Chen estate that was attended by senators, CEOs, and old money families who'd ignored me my entire life. They all wanted to meet the Chen heiress now, the girl who'd brought down a con artist and saved a tech empire. I accepted their attention with grace and polite distance, remembering that most of them had looked through me when I was just poor Lily, the neglected stepdaughter. They were useful now, but not friends. My real friends were the people Grandfather introduced me to, the children of other powerful families who understood what it meant to carry a legacy, who saw ambition as virtue rather than vice. They became my circle, my network, my future business partners. I also reconciled, slowly and carefully, with parts of my old life. Some of my classmates from my school years reached out, apologetic, explaining they'd believed Emma's lies. I forgave most of them. Holding grudges against teenagers who'd been manipulated seemed petty. But I never forgot who'd been truly cruel versus who'd just been passive. As for Emma, I heard updates occasionally through the social network. She'd tried to rebuild her life, change her name, start fresh at a community college. But the internet never forgot. Her name was forever linked to her mother's crimes and her own plagiarism. She worked retail jobs and lived in small apartments, all her dreams of wealth and status gone. I didn't feel satisfaction at her suffering, but I didn't feel guilt either. She'd made her choices. She'd been cruel when she could have been kind, greedy when she could have been fair. This was simply consequences catching up. Patricia remained in prison. I attended her parole hearing just to observe, just to remind the board of what she'd done. She looked old and tired, nothing like the glamorous woman who'd terrorized my childhood. Her parole was denied. She wouldn't be eligible again for 3 more years. When she saw me in the gallery, perfectly dressed and clearly successful, she'd looked at me with such hatred that the guards had to restrain her. "This is all your fault," she'd screamed. "You ruined everything. I gave you a home, a family, and you destroyed us all out of jealousy." I just looked at her calmly and said, "No, Patricia, you destroyed yourself. I just made sure everyone knew about it." The years rolled on. I went to Harvard, majored in business and computer science, graduated with honors. I took a position at the Chen Group, working my way up not through nepotism, but through results. I proved myself in every role, every deal, every negotiation. Dad remained CEO of Tech Dynamics, but I joined the board at 21 as the second largest shareholder. Together, we built the company even larger into one of the top tech firms in the country. And we built our relationship, too, into something real and strong. On my 25th birthday, Grandfather Chen called me into his study, the same room where we'd plotted Patricia's downfall so many years ago. "I'm retiring," he said without preamble. "I'm 78 years old and it's time. The Chen Group needs young blood, fresh vision. It needs you." I stared at him. "Grandfather, I'm only 25. There are people in the company who've been there for decades. And they'll all answer to you because you're a Chen and you've earned it. You saved your father's company when you were 16 years old. You built your investment portfolio into $50 million through your own skill. You negotiated the merger with Tanaka Industries that people said was impossible. You're ready, Lily. You've been ready since you walked into this house in the rain at 11 years old and asked for help." He handed me a folder. Inside was the paperwork transferring control of the Chen Group to me, making me CEO and majority owner of a multi-billion-dollar empire. "Your mother would be so proud," he said softly. "And I'm proud. You took the worst thing that ever happened to you and turned it into your greatest strength. You survived, you thrived, and you never let them break you." I took the folder with shaking hands. "Thank you, Grandfather, for everything, for believing in me when no one else did." "Family believes in family," he said simply. "That's what your stepmother never understood. She saw you as competition, as an obstacle. But you were always meant to be powerful, Lily. It was just a question of when you'd accept it." The press conference announcing my position as CEO of the Chen Group made international news. At 25, I was one of the youngest CEOs of a major corporation in the country. The business magazines called me a prodigy, a genius, the next generation of business leadership. I gave interviews where I spoke carefully about my journey, about learning from my grandfather, about honoring my mother's legacy. I didn't mention Patricia or Emma by name. They were footnotes in my story now, not the main characters. But everyone knew. The internet knew. The whispers followed me. That's the girl whose stepmother tried to destroy her, and she ended up running an empire instead. Dad came to the celebration dinner, beaming with pride. "Your mom would have loved to see this," he said, raising his glass. "To Lily Chen, CEO, force of nature, and the daughter I should have appreciated from the beginning." I clinked glasses with him, with Grandfather, with the board members and executives who'd become my team. And I thought about that 11-year-old girl standing in the rain, abandoned and alone, who'd made a choice in that moment to never be helpless again. I'd lived 2 lives. In the first, I'd died at 19, murdered by a stepmother who saw me as an inconvenient obstacle to wealth. In the second, I'd been reborn with knowledge and rage, and I'd used both to build something unshakable. The Chen Group flourished. Under my leadership, I expanded into new markets, made strategic acquisitions, doubled the company's value in 3 years. I became known as ruthless but fair, strategic and visionary. Other companies wanted to partner with me. Rivals wanted to beat me. Everyone wanted to understand how I'd risen so far, so fast. Only a handful of people knew the full truth, that I'd been given a second chance, that I'd used foreknowledge and determination to rewrite my fate. Grandfather Chen suspected, I think. Sometimes he'd look at me with those sharp eyes, and I'd wonder if he knew that his granddaughter had somehow lived this all before. But it didn't matter. What mattered was that I'd won. Completely. Utterly. Permanently. When I was 27, Patricia was released from prison. She tried to reach out through lawyers, claiming she'd reformed and wanted a chance to apologize. I declined to meet her. There was nothing she could say that would matter, no apology that could erase what she'd done. Emma reached out too, a handwritten letter that my assistant almost threw away. I read it out of curiosity. It was full of excuses and justifications, claiming she'd been young and influenced by her mother, asking for help getting into business school, suggesting we could be real sisters now that time had passed. I wrote back one line. You had a chance to be my real sister. You chose to be my enemy instead. Live with that choice. I never heard from either of them again. At 30, I married, not for money or strategy, but for love. His name was James, a programmer Dad had hired years ago who'd worked his way up to CTO of Tech Dynamics. He was brilliant and kind, and he loved me for who I was, not for what I had. He knew my whole story, including the parts I didn't usually share, and he'd just said, "You survived hell and came out the other side a queen. How could I not fall for you?" Dad walked me down the aisle, tears in his eyes. Grandfather Chen gave a toast that had the entire reception alternating between laughter and tears. And I stood there in my mother's renovated wedding dress, surrounded by people who truly loved me and felt a peace I'd never imagined possible in my first life. The years continued. I became a mother myself, twin girls that I named Mei and Ling after my mother. I raised them with love and boundaries, with confidence and kindness. I taught them to be strong without being cruel, ambitious without being ruthless. I made sure they knew their grandmother's story, the legacy they carried, the strength that ran in their blood. Dad was an attentive grandfather, making up for his failures as a father by being present for his granddaughters. He'd retired from Tech Dynamics at 60, selling his shares but remaining as a consultant. He traveled, he dated carefully with my approval. He finally dealt with his grief over losing Mom. "I wasted so many years," he told me once, watching the twins play in the Chen Estate gardens. "Running. From the pain of losing Mei Ling, I almost lost you too. Thank God you were stronger than I was." "Thank Mom," I replied. "She gave me her backbone. You gave me her memory. Together, that was enough." Grandfather Chen lived to see his great-granddaughters turn 5, long enough to start teaching them the family business in the playful way he'd once taught me. He passed peacefully in his sleep at 88, and at his funeral, business leaders and politicians came from around the world to pay respects to the patriarch who'd built an empire and raised an heir worthy of it. His will left everything to me, as expected, but included a letter I read alone in his study afterward. "Lily," it began, in his precise handwriting. "I don't know if you lived this life before or if you simply have the gift of seeing clearly what others miss. It doesn't matter. What matters is that you took the pain they gave you and forged it into power. You honored your mother's memory not by being soft, but by being steel wrapped in grace. You are everything the Chen family should be. Make sure your daughters know this. Survival isn't enough. We must thrive. We must build. We must leave the world better than we found it. And we must never, ever let those who hurt us win. You never did. I'm proud to have been your grandfather. Make me proud in death as you did in life." I kept that letter in a frame on my desk at Chen Group headquarters, a reminder of the man who'd seen me when I was invisible to everyone else, who'd given me the tools to save myself. By the time I was 40, the Chen Group was a global powerhouse, and I was regularly listed among the most powerful business leaders in the world. Tech Dynamics had merged with Chen Group in a deal I'd personally orchestrated, bringing Dad's company under the family umbrella and cementing our combined legacy. I sat in board meetings with people who'd once dismissed me, who'd believed Patricia's lies about me being difficult and ungrateful. They treated me with careful respect now, knowing I had the power to make or break their careers. I was never cruel. I didn't need to be. My success was revenge enough. Sometimes late at night when I couldn't sleep, I'd think about my first life, about dying at 19, alone and betrayed, my last thoughts full of rage and regret. I'd wonder what that version of me would think of this life, of how far I'd come. Then I'd look at my husband sleeping beside me, at the pictures of my daughters on the nightstand, at the empire I'd built from nothing but determination and a second chance. And I'd smile, because that girl who died in the rain, who was abandoned and abused and murdered for her inheritance, she'd gotten her revenge in the most perfect way possible. She'd come back, she'd won, and she'd built something so magnificent that her enemies' names were only remembered as cautionary tales in her story. Patricia died in prison at 62 of a heart attack. I heard about it. Through a news alert, she'd become one of those criminals whose cases were studied in business ethics classes, the cautionary tale of greed and abuse. I felt nothing at the news of her death. She'd been dead to me for decades. Emma reached out one final time after her mother's death, a desperate email asking for help with funeral costs. I had my assistant send a check for exactly $1,000, enough to cover a basic cremation, nothing more. The note attached said simply, "This is more than you ever gave me. Consider us even." At 50, I stepped back from day-to-day operations of the Chen Group, transitioning to chairman while promoting younger executives who'd proven themselves. My daughters were 20, brilliant and ambitious, studying at top universities and already showing the strategic minds I'd cultivated in them. They knew they'd inherit an empire, but more than that, they'd inherited something more valuable. The knowledge that you don't let anyone make you a victim, that family should protect you, not prey on you, and that the best revenge is building something so magnificent that your enemies become irrelevant. I told them the full story on their 21st birthday about Patricia and Emma, about being left in the rain, about the years of abuse and the careful planning of revenge. They listened, horrified and inspired. "You could have just walked away," May said. "Grandfather Chen offered you that option. You could have left Dad and lived here, been safe immediately." "I could have," I agreed. "But then I would have always wondered. Always felt like I'd lost something. This way I got everything. My father back, my inheritance, justice for my mother, and the satisfaction of knowing I beat them at their own game." "No," Ling corrected, smiling. "You didn't beat them at their own game. You changed the game entirely. They were playing checkers, thinking they were winning. You were playing chess, 10 moves ahead, and you'd already won before they knew the game had changed." I laughed. Your grandfather Chen would have loved that analysis. Now, as I write this, I'm 60 years old. My daughters run the Chen Group together, a dynamic duo that reminds me of what Emma and I could have been if she'd chosen differently. My husband and I split our time between the Chen estate and a home we built by the ocean. Dad passed 2 years ago at 78, surrounded by family, at peace with his life and his choices. His last words to me were, "Thank you for giving me a second chance. Thank you for being strong enough to save us both." I think about rebirth differently now. I don't know if I truly lived this life twice or if that experience when I was 7 was some kind of vivid premonition, or if I simply had the gift of seeing clearly how patterns would play out. It doesn't matter. What matters is that I recognize the moment in the rain as the turning point it was, and I made a choice. I chose to fight. I chose to plan. I chose to become powerful instead of remaining a victim. And I won. The Chen Group stands as one of the most respected corporations in the world. Tech Dynamics, under the Chen umbrella, continues to innovate and lead. My daughters are poised to take everything I've built and make it even greater. The family line that Patricia tried to end has become a dynasty. Sometimes I still dream about that night, standing in the rain, 11 years old, watching the Mercedes drive away. But in my dreams now, I'm not the abandoned child. I'm the woman I became, standing tall and unbreakable, and I'm watching my younger self make the call that changed everything. "Call him," Dream Me whispers to that girl in the rain. "Call your grandfather. Fight back. Survive. Thrive. Win." And she does, because that's the thing about rebirth. It's not about getting a second chance to live the same life over again. It's about recognizing the moments that define you and choosing definitively and completely to define yourself. Patricia and Emma tried to write me as the victim in their story of greed and success. Instead, I rewrote the entire narrative. I became the protagonist of my own life, the author of my own fate, the architect of my own revenge. They left me at soccer practice in the rain, thinking they'd broken me. They had no idea they'd forged me into steel, and I never, ever played on their team again. I built my own team, my own empire, my own legacy. And in the end, that wasn't just revenge. It was justice. It was triumph. It was everything.